Welcome, folks, to the panel on queer books and fighting book bans, queer comics and fighting book bans. I just want to name and acknowledge, we have at Prairie Comics Festival a land acknowledgement comic to check out in the festival hall. But in doing so, just honoring that acknowledgement and going further than that, I want to name that what we're talking about today, when we think about queerphobia, transphobia, and intersectional oppression of all kind, that is an arm of colonialism, and that continues to do violence on people, and just recognizing the role of Two-Spirit people in our understanding of ourselves and the ongoing perpetuation of violence. So we're speaking today with some wonderful comic creators, and so we'll start there with some introductions. Sorry, can you hear me okay with the mask and everything? Okay. So I'll just invite our folks to introduce themselves, and just your name, your pronouns, and just a little bit about the work you create, if that's okay. Can we start at the end here maybe and work this way? Okay.
Hi, I'm Scott Henderson, he, him. I'm from Winnipeg here, and I draw comics like, well, everybody here, I guess, but it's basically all I've ever done my entire life is draw pictures to stories. And only in the last 7 or so years has it been incorporating any of my bisexual identity or anything like that. Well, officially, technically, some of it slipped into some earlier stuff, but but only fairly recently have I been really embracing that.
Hi, my name is Natalie Mark. I'm also locally based. I use they, them pronouns, and it's pronouns if you can incorporate that into your vernacular. I know sometimes people don't. And the type of comics I make are sort of all over the place, I think. I've done comics that are research-based, as well as things that explore labor, as well as relationships between other people and stuff. And when I do romance, it's a little bit weird. I think I've mostly only done horror romance, funnily enough. But yeah, that's a bit about me.
Okay. And hello, I'm Jayden Charles. I'm originally from Ontario, so I flew in here. I'm from Hamilton. I use they, them pronouns. I make comics, zines, illustrations, mainly just about my own identity as a non-binary person, black person, all of that, mental health, and about relationships and stuff like that. And also things that I'm just absolutely obsessed with, and that's kind of what my deal is.
Right on. Thanks so much, folks. And I'm Jay. I use he, they pronouns. I'm an artist working in some zines, and I also do a lot of illustrative work. I like to work with body diversity. Lately I've been doing a lot of furry stuff, just kind of run the gamut, queer, trans kind of stuff. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation today. Obviously, everyone brings such expertise to this topic. What I wanted to do is sort of set the stage a little bit and talk about particularly book bans, just in case folks are coming in kind of wondering why that is in the title and what it's about. And so bear with me here as I speak my best attempt at a brief version of this. I'm probably missing a lot of nuance, but just to introduce the topic and then to get on to some questions for our folks. So broadly speaking, concepts of book bans refer to an ongoing movement working to flag and remove books under the pretense that the content is sexually or otherwise inappropriate. This is a poorly veiled attack on works that reflect experiences and education for many marginalized communities. Today, we're focusing on the impact on 2S LGBTQIA+ folks, but it's important to name that these conversations are not divorced from attacks on examples like critical race theory in schools and in educational and for youth. So Canada is experiencing this currently through different examples. I'll only name two. Again, we'd be here all day, but there was the 2023 proposal in the Brandon School Division to review content of books, which was successfully fought. by community efforts, and the ongoing attack on books, particularly comics, perpetuated by the current Alberta government and parental rights groups. And that conversation continues to happen, but again, that's happening across Canada in a lot of both implicit and explicit ways. Those are just two examples, again, to set the stage of what we're talking about when we talk about book bans targeting queer books. So to begin, I just wanted to ask folks, and we can do this in just kind of a way, come into the conversation when you feel you'd like to. What brings you to today's panel speaking specifically about queer comics and fighting book bans?
I can start. I think for me, originally, I went to Catholic school, and I think a lot of my work kind of centers or a lot of my work is sort of just opposing that experience that I had, because I feel like a lot of my own coming out has been oh God, I can't be queer, I can't be trans because I'm Catholic, and this was a big part of my life when I was growing up. So I think a lot of it is just because of that experience, I'm let me just do it complete opposite and just be as queer and openly queer as I possibly can. And I think that just kind of goes in with the other identities that I have, being obviously very much a person of color, a Black person specifically. And I think there's, inserting myself into spaces that queer people or Black people are not usually seen in. And I'm it's always very fun to go to events and not be the only person of color in the room. And it's yeah, thank God. So I think being very visibly queer, very visibly Black in a space, I'm that's kind of why I always inserting myself, because if a mediocre white man can, why can't I, so that's kind of that's my headspace in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see that idea of representation and what that means to you now as a creator and what that meant to you as you were growing up.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, as I said, I'm sort of new to this community, relatively speaking. But as I said, I did sort of pepper it into some things. It was, my bisexuality was there. I didn't ever feel comfortable expressing it. I didn't know if it would be okay, or all that imposter syndrome problems that also come about. But it was sort of slipped into one of my own fantasy works, Crowns of Era, where the main character was always, I was working on it for 20 years, he was always bi. And I was oh no, I just want to do this, but it's no, that's a little part of me in there, which I didn't acknowledge until several years later, sort of thing. But now I like to incorporate more different queer characters. I'm actually starting to work on something now that is going to be a super gay book, but still lots of fantasy and magic and things like that, but I'm working at having lots of diversity, both within the LGBT community and the themes in that, but also body diversity. There's bigger guys, thinner, and non-binary, and different ethnicities, and just trying to have all that diversity, because all of that is still important, and that sort of thing. But also still having fun fantasy with magic and, 1920s era fashion and things like that. So, but yeah, and then I also happen to supporting other books that I've worked on that have queer characters in them and that sort of thing. So a lot more of it's happening in the last few years, especially, I'd say, sort of thing. It's, despite all the problems, the topic of our panel here, it is still, it's getting better bit by bit. 2 steps forward, sometimes a step back, of course, but.
I appreciate the idea of having characters representing part of yourself, and I almost think of the concept of coding in a way that comes up in these discussions as well. So thanks for sharing your perspective. Yeah.
The main reason I'm here is because I was I had no clue I was going to be on here, but then they were you're on this panel in the email, and I was what? What?
Real. I was okay.
We love the honesty.
But on a more serious note, I actually, in my comics, I haven't done too much queer relationships in my comics, although arguably people would say horror romance and monster romance is inherently queer. But I think probably like another reason why I am here is because I am familiar with like movement work as well. And then like also from my perspective as someone who does movement work is that fighting against book bans is one of the easiest ways to disrupt fascism, which is already here and only propelling forward, especially like in most Western countries. And this is like one of the most easy ways to be involved in local communities because it's happening with our like public libraries, especially like in rural communities, as well as like the education system and what like children are like experiencing, as well as like access to these stories, because that's also put under risk. And it's like a great way to like get started into understanding like, oh, why are these like horrible things happening, and why are like the material conditions of our lives and other aspects getting worse. It's like a really good entryway and still like holds like a lot of value to a lot of people. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's like a necessity to talk about this as well. So yeah.
I appreciate that like bringing together, yes, the stories and the nonfiction side of things, like doing this work on a community level, on an activism level. And I appreciate too naming what it is, right? That fascism is here, and this is what underpins our conversation today. Absolutely. Just thinking about the stories that exist now, I was curious if there are types of queer stories, or I should bring stories in to encompass nonfiction as well, lived experience, educational, queer and trans stories that you would like to see more of in comics. So starting there and kind of going like, we're talking about bans, what would you like to see more of? So throwing it out there, seeing what folks think.
I have an answer for this. I think my biggest thing is just like more people of color in, like queer people of color. I think what's an interesting thing, me and somewhat related, but I think when it comes to like media in general, like I think a lot of the time, any sort of queer representation is usually just white, very white, right? And I think one example is this. It might be hopefully not too niche, but every year there's a thing on Twitter where somebody goes through the top works on Archive of Our Own, or AO3, and anybody at AO3 enjoyer. But there's a list that comes out every year of like the top works that have been added for the year, and if you go through, there's like a top 100, and if you go through that list, like it's pretty much like all white characters. Like there's
it's a white yaoi economy.
It's like it's bad, and like most of the time, if there is a black person, it's like somehow Harry Potter. I'm like, I don't know how Harry Potter slips in. I didn't even know there's black people in that film in there, but I've never seen anything Harry Potter, but Harry Potter always makes it in there, and there's a black person in every ship, and it's always with another white person. But I think a lot of the time I just wish that there was more black, like, black characters, like people of color. Like it's usually, if it's a one person of color, it's like they're paired with another, like a white person. And I think when I was like 17 and like Moonlight was the film that like I feel like changed my entire brain chemistry when that came out, and it was like two black characters and like things like that. And talking about that, I think a lot of people are very hesitant to read or consume any sort of media where it's not like a white person involved, because I don't know what their deal is, but like there's more, like even on that AO3 thing, there's more representation of non-human characters that don't have a canonical race than there is of like a black person or an indigenous person, right? Like the only indigenous person on that like AO3 list is literally Taika Waititi's character in Our Flag Means Death, right? And that's the only indigenous person on that list, right? And all the black characters is like from Harry Potter or like that one dude from Stranger Things. That's like, I don't watch Stranger Things either, but I'm just like, but most of them are either like anime characters or, where it's like, the technically Asian representation, but like not really, because it's, or it's white. it's
And
bad.
like white people look at anime characters and like see them as like white, not Asian.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
They'll be like, "Oh my god, my white fave like Bakugo," and I'm like, "What?"
Absolutely. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I also, like, I'm thinking about something that really shapes consciousness, which is what stories do. And I think of the way that, like, as a trans man, there's always this narrative of, well, you step into privilege. Well, yeah, as a white trans man, in some very real ways, that's true. That's not true for all trans men.
Yeah.
And that those stories are absolutely left out when we're
Yeah,
thinking about
yeah.
conceptualizing what that one piece, which is trans masculinity, but so much of the queer experiences, that there isn't a monolith, and it's so true. So thank you for highlighting that. And I didn't know about like the tops of that. That's such a meaningful kind of cultural picture to understand. It's like, wow, that's, yeah, I can understand why you're like, wow, okay. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think it's been brought up with other panels in the past, but I would say that sometimes the thing that people want to see more is more diversity also in the story. Like, it's not everything is a coming out story sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that goes into the other elements of privilege or lack of with racial background, but also class, or even with the body image, like, you know, whether they're big and butch, and what does that mean? Like, do you automatically assume they're tops or bottoms, or
Yeah. Yeah.
automatically non-binary that they don't dress feminine or masculine or anything like there's so much variety and that sort of thing, and like they sort of all need like there's still always going to be coming out stories because there just will be, but because that is still a big theme, but yeah, still having all those other stories, and definitely need more representation for all those aspects.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be like 1 million books, but
Good.
yes.
I want more of everything. Like, I do want 1 million books about like nothing with like queer and trans people, because there's so much garbage of like straight romance or just like any genre, but the assumption is that they're like straight or like heterosexual. Like when I'm thinking of like what I consumed as like a kid and a teenager, I was also like big into like nerd stuff like anime and like comics, and like I found like especially with like shoujo tends to be more like a bit more transgressive and experimental with gender. Like this may surprise people, but as a shoujo scholar, I know that the BL genre like comes from shoujo. So like if people are looking at like, oh, the most popular shoujo, like there will be like BL manga in it. And then when I think of like what I was like reading and like watching, like my like understanding of like queerness would be like, oh, because like Naruto and Sasuke are like in love with each other, but obviously that's not like a queer piece of media. Well, it is, because the writer, when he was talking about Sasuke, he's like, oh, that's like based off of like me and my friend when we were in middle school, and he moved away, and I was just like so sad I could never talk to him again, so it was always me chasing after Sasuke. So I was like, okay, like,
Yeah.
but anyway, so that's like not like categorized as queer media. And then when I started engaging with queer media, like I would read some BL, a lot of it, similar to a lot of other shoujo that wasn't queer, would have some problematic themes, and like more like violence and stuff like that. So reading a lot of that, I was like, oh, okay, like it would be nice to see like more stuff with like joy and like still like really interesting and transgressive, but not like so reliant on like suffering and like bad endings. But overall, I'm like, you know, when people are making queer stories, like there should be like the really painful stuff. There should be like the things that are like heart-wrenching. It just like shouldn't be like the only thing we see where like someone dies at the end. Like I want everything. I want more slop. Like I want what's that like threesome, like one about badminton with Zendaya.
Challenges.
Like, there should be
Yeah.
like queer challenge. Like, you know, it should be so bad that we're like, oh, this is garbage. Like, but it's like it should exist. It should be normal. Like we shouldn't have like people being like, oh, like this shouldn't exist because, you know, it's like too like different, it's too weird. Like I want like a million of like bad queer stories. I want a million like violent queer stories. I want a million like joyful like queer stories. Like it should just all exist. Like it should be at the same level.
Boring
and of
queer
course,
stories.
like yeah, more boring
such a
queer
thing.
stories. Like I want like boring gay people representation. Like it should just all exist, and also like with all like the diversity that comes with it. And I'm also like there should also be like bad like BIPOC like films and like comics and like TV. Like this should just be about a person being like normal and stuff. Like they don't have to like suffer. Like they can just like I just want like a million of everything. So
They can't ban us if we're ever.
yeah. We have to we need to keep creating more slop until it can compete with the mediocre white and straight slop.
I think it's just because like the internet is just like if anyone uses like Twitter, unfortunately, and like you'll just like see discourse about the most like random thing ever, right? Like I think a lot of queer people might feel that like if they make something that's a bit too much, then it's like uh-oh, right? Because like realistically,
like
like
we're seeing so many like porn bans too,
Oh,
and that's like
oh,
related
yeah.
to like
It's-
how like queer people are going to experience like the backlash as well. Like both like literally like queer bans are like related to like how they want to like basically like oppress sex workers as well. Like it's all like the same.
Yeah, it's like how
Yeah.
a lot of people I've seen online that make like NSFW specifically, where like a lot of them are like there was a lot of where PayPal was not allowing them to like essentially like you know, have money sent to them essentially for their work. And even with itch.io, I believe it is, that basically made it difficult for a lot of queer like or NSFW specifically artists to like sell their work on there, because they had to sort of change the thing to be like you know, change their stuff to be like, it's like if it said something not safe for work, then it would be kind of flagged as like they wouldn't be able to sell it. And that was like a big issue, because that also just goes in the thing of like, you know, banning queer stories. And it's like, what's like, where's the line between like, we're saving the children, right? And like, well, what if this like, you know, grown ass man wants to buy this like trans queer thing, right? And it's like, why are we banning it for everybody when we're hypothetically trying to protect this like child? It's like, it's really not going to do much, because like, I mean, how many of us were 13 on AO3, right? It's like, it really doesn't make much of a difference. It's just wanting to police what queer people can make, and it's awful.
And something to like add on to that, like that didn't come out of nowhere. So kind of like the history of like these bans or censorships is like net neutrality became a thing in the US, I think in like the early 2010s. And that was kind of their start on creating policies that would restrict and eventually like extinguish like online sex work, right? But it was under the guise of like, oh, we're like saving people from like sex trafficking, and like we're like trying to like protect children from like porn or whatever. But like sex work is different from like sex trafficking. They're like not the same thing at all. Like it's a matter of like autonomy and like labor, right? And then from net neutrality, they introduced SESTA, FOSTA, those things in the US, and that like really like was like the big thing that got a lot of people offline and like really like hurt their like jobs and like job security. And now I think in the US it's COSA, and in Canada there's another similar bill to COSA that's supposed to be like protect children from like pornography on the internet. That's why you all need to like use your we all want you to scan your ID if you want to use like Twitter or something.
They got that in like
which
the
is
UK.
like a huge like security issue. Like it's like to serve surveillancing, and as we know like we're getting more and more surveillance, and like fascism is like propelling and stuff, and so we have that. And then like MasterCard is like the US like capital oligarchy of like how money moves around, and so I like looked into this. I like have this. Maybe that's why I was like brought into the panel. But so when SESTA, FOSTA was being lobbied in the USA, it was like MasterCard that like sponsored a lot of politicians. So like they were basically like paying lobbyists to get these policies passed, and it's because like MasterCard is like owned by a bunch of like fundamentalist Christians, right? And so you always see a small amount of people with a lot of power, money, and influence being able to push their agenda that like hurts everyone, right? It's originally to like abolish sex work, but it hurts queer people, it hurts like people of color, and anyone who whose like work doesn't fit into like the mainstream image of what they want to be like normal and like pleasing or whatever. So you have that happening, and so this has been like building up for like over a decade, and we're kind of like seeing the consequences where people's accounts, like their banking accounts, their PayPal, how they're receiving money is being like directly affected too. And then also like they'll say like, oh, it's to protect the children. I think it was so interesting that you brought up Alberta specifically, because this summer I had been in Calgary because the G7 conference was happening in Alberta, which is when a bunch of like leaders from like these imperial states such as the USA, Canada, Italy, Japan, they like meet to like discuss the economic plan for the world for like the next couple years, basically talking about like, oh, like who are we going to like conquer next, and like what are we going to do about our money to make more profit. So it's like there at a summit to resist the G7. Don't worry, I was not for them. But there, we found out in Alberta that currently in the education system, like the children of people who are undocumented workers, it's illegal for them to go to school. So it's interesting that this bill is being pushed to like ban queer books and queer topics, but there's no free education for all children in Alberta. Like the children of undocumented workers and sometimes like migrant workers or foreign temporary workers, they're not able to send their children to school. It's like illegal for them to go to school. So that is happening at the same time that these books bans are happening to supposedly protect the children. And also, sorry for like being on for so long, but like they'll say it's to protect the children, but it's really to control them so that their autonomy is limited and they have less access to information and decision making, because as we know, it's often these people who have so much power, they want to like control the children so that they can't recognize abuse or exploitation when it happens. So yeah, that's what I would like to say. That there's so many contradictions about queer bans and stuff. So yeah.
No, I so appreciate you laying that like systemic piece, and also the way that language works, right? Because as queer folks, we're not new to this protect the children rhetoric. It's taken different forms for a very, very long time. And what stands out to me is the idea of what it actually means to affirm and protect children. And something that I was curious about to ask folks is, for yourselves in your lives, what queer media, whether direct or indirect, we can talk coding, we can talk seeing queerness wherever, because we're good at that. What impacted you as you were growing up? Any particular, like it could be comics or other media that like really you felt seen in, that you want to name and give some credit to?
I think for me, like I mentioned this already, like I think the biggest thing that like completely like shifted everything was Moonlight, when I watched that when I was in high school. And I think that was like the first time I've ever seen like two black men as like in a relationship. And like I think even seeing that like win the best picture for at the Oscars that year, and I was like, oh my god, like this is like a thing. And I mean that is like the reason I ended up going to school for film. And I think another thing that kind of actually changed, like I think the first time I ever saw myself represented in a media, which I don't know if this is good rep or not, but when I was like 14, I watched Orange is the New Black. And one of the characters, I forget her name, but she is like a buzz cut and she's a very like masculine black woman. And that was like the first time I ever felt represented, because at the time I was still identifying as a woman. But that was like, oh, I can be like black and queer and, you know, a lesbian at the time. And that was like, oh, okay, that's like permission, because I didn't like when I first came out, I didn't know that like black queer people existed. I literally thought it was me. And like where I grew up in Hamilton, and Hamilton is very, very white. And like all of my friends, like I went to art school, and that was still, even though I went to art school in Toronto, it was still very, very white. So when I realized that like, oh, you can be like black and queer, I was like, this is it. We're so back. Like this is so great. So I think that was sort of like the first like two things, like as a teenager, where I was like, yeah, that's it, like of like black representation in media when I was a teenager.
I don't really have very much right now because I came out much later and it was all very hidden and that sort of stuff. I mean, some things that probably help. I mean, I see a lot of things now. Like I like seeing some books. I've mentioned multiple times before, but I really like Witch Boy because it's mostly just about witches and that, but there's very much a queer subtext to it about this boy who wants to be a witch, but boys can't be witches, they have to be shapeshifters and that sort of thing. And so, and I really liked that it was talking about queer stuff, but it was like a subtext. It wasn't necessarily obvious or anything like that, yet it could very well be a book that's banned, I guess, just because. But I like seeing that. I never really had any, like, I don't have memories of things that told me that it was not safe or whatnot to be who I was. But it was just sense sort of thing. But for me, it was, my own journey was that my acknowledging that had a lot to do with being just truthful about a lot of other things. I was going through some other life-shifting events at the time sort of thing, so I was learning to be just more honest with myself, and part of that was like, well, I like guys too, so whatever. And so just embracing it, and then I sort of get into more books, queer books or shows, even like Queer Eye or whatever. I really liked it, so. And I've always liked The Birdcage. We still watch it like every few months. But that's, for me, that was always a good example. I didn't necessarily see scene necessarily, but it was fun, it was funny. It does have a reasonably positive light. There are two main characters. Well, characters are gay. Only one of them actually was, well, not at the time, but and that sort of thing. But that's more than you can say in the 90s, especially, sort of thing, when it came out. So
I appreciate the way you touch on that. It is important to name that not everyone has that access to see themselves at a younger age. And it sounds like for you, you're like connected to media and kind of seeing these stories like, oh, there I am. I can be who I am, and that can happen at any age. And so I appreciate you naming that. Yeah. Yeah,
and as sort of thinking about it, it's like, like shows like Star Trek are really great. They sometimes deal with gender and that sort of thing. But thinking back, it's like there really wasn't very many like lesbians was fine because lesbians might be hot or whatever the mentality was, sort of thing. But you still didn't necessarily see very many gay men in the shows or that sort of thing, and thinking back sort of thing anyway. So I've also, my partner and I have been watching, sometimes we go through watching like shows from movies or whatever from the 80s, and it's like, oh, maybe that's why I had issues about coming out, because you know they throw the word homo around a lot and just all that sort of stuff. It's like, oh, I guess I missed that, but it still got stuck in the back of my mind at the time, sort of thing. So
yeah, absolutely.
For me, I mentioned this earlier, but I've always been into like anime and manga, especially shoujo, and I feel like that's always like played around with queerness, although not like historically not in the best way from time to time. It's definitely had its issues in the past, but I feel like there's a lot of like experimentation, like with gender, and then also like relationships and how they express themselves to each other. So I've always really appreciated that. And then when I started to realize like, oh, I'm like probably queer, I did this really wacky thing where I started like researching like every single queer film that's like ever existed, and then I would like go through it like analytically and like watch every single film. And also, yeah, Moonlight is also one of my favorite films ever. I've also done that with like Chinese films as well, or just like Asian films in general. channel. And so like I've also seen like In the Mood for Love, which is not a queer film, but like when you see like the artistic conversation that the directors have with each other, where they're like really influenced by each other, and it kind of like when you watch both films, you're like, oh, like there's so much like tenderness and love and longing between each characters, and like not to spoil it or anything, but in both films, they don't end up in relationships with each other. Sorry if that was a spoiler. But trust me, the journey is worth it. But you can kind of see, like, even with this, like, love, longing, and tenderness, like, you can see, oh, like, the straight version and also, like, the queer version, even though they're like completely different films, like they're both capable of just as much emotional impact as well. So that's kind of nice to see, just like consuming all of these films. So I've also seen a lot of like bad films too, but a lot of them were really nice too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like this is making me want to go home and watch Moonlight.
Yeah.
Like I haven't, I'm gonna watch it again. To kind of honor like the idea of queer media. Oh, my thing is going off. There we go. To honor and kind of close our conversation, or start to close our conversation so we have time for questions. Something that is reflected in data that they have around 2S LGBTQIA youth. There's a lot of very heavy data of the effects of attacks like book bans. And the data also reflects that affirming environments save lives. And so I wanted to ask folks if they could say something to youth at this time, just a message to share to youth who are facing the current, the political climate right now. What would you like to say to them?
Gosh, it's a lot of pressure. I feel like when I first came out, I was 14. Deep in Catholic school, and it was rough because I didn't know that I was allowed to be queer because I was in that environment of being in a Catholic school, and then I came out as trans when I was 17, and I think there's just like such like somehow like a big deal in coming out and like being trans, and realistically it's not that big of a deal. Like it is a big deal for the person. I mean, like for the politicians that are like having a whole big deal, I'm like, there's bigger issues in your province and state than trans people, than the one trans person in your sports, And I think a lot of it is just like, it truly does get better. This is like cliche a bit, I bet, but I think like, I think it's always great to be able to surround yourself with people that will support you, regardless if it's like your friends or your, like teachers or your parents, if you have that luxury. But I think surrounding yourself with people that are supportive. And I think when it comes to like, queer youth, I think there's a lot of, queer adults that are, living in now, and that, we get the kind of luxury of like now being, old enough to support youth. And I think, it will eventually get better, because I feel like, it gets kind of awful, and then there's like the up in that. So I think, surround yourself with people that will support you, because there's always somebody that will support you, even if it doesn't feel like even if it feels like it's literally just you and nobody else. There's plenty of people that will support you regardless of whatever your situation is.
This entire time, because usually like I've been looking at you every single time to go before me, but now you're looking at me. Okay, so I'll go first.
Yeah, we did have
okay, yeah. So what I would say to queer youth is that the situation right now is probably like really bad for all of us. But I will say that like I don't want to be like cliche and be like, oh, it does get better, because like sometimes for some people it like doesn't. But like your identity as like a queer or trans person, there's, especially as a youth, if you have to like live with your parents, and like if they're not supportive, there's so many things you can't control about how they think, how they feel, how they behave. There's also like so many things you can't control about what they do that are also like unrelated to queerness and transness as well. But are things that are for you. Like you can choose your name, you can choose your pronouns, you can choose who you spend time with and who you share different parts of yourself. If it's not safe to do so openly, find people who you can trust and who you can share those things with, and like nurture that like warmthness, nurture the community, find spaces, sometimes in real life, sometimes, you know, it'll be online. But like there are things that you can find that will help fill the gap of what other people aren't able to give you. And just know that you don't need to rely on the approval or the affection of people who are not interested in supporting you. And also just know that the way they feel now might not be the way they feel in the future. People might change their minds, sometimes they don't. There's just like a lot of things that you just don't know what's going to happen. And the most important thing is to survive and also find a way to thrive until you are able to be in a position where you can live openly and authentically. And if it never happens, you'll still have those private moments for yourself as well. And you'll know, and the people who you tell will know, and there will always be people supporting you, and there will always be people fighting for you. Yeah.
I think you guys said a lot more than I would, but and better. But from that, I guess I'll just sort of add to it being like community, like finding a community, even if it's a community of 2 or just 3, it could be private or whatnot, but finding that community of being open to letting people within your community to support them is a big thing. I mean, my own experience, like in hindsight, it would have been fine for me to come out, but of course, I just never thought so. But in the end, it was totally fine. I've blessedly not had any negative consequences, but I was worried that it would be the absolute worst consequences. I guess for somebody like myself, who's a little bit older, I guess, probably here, there is other people. You might be alone, but there is other people like you. It will hopefully get better, and to find other communities. I think the other thing would be for our communities to always be supporting new members of the community. I was supposed to say recruits, but that sounds maybe not quite the maybe it is the right word, but maybe it could be taken out of context for the people that are creating all the bands, right? Thank you, ADHD. I just totally lost my thought. But to support the communities, but also to for everybody to still keep fighting against the bans, so that there is this content, because that wasn't there for when I was younger, is that it was okay that there was those different lifestyles. Like that still needs to exist and be seen, so you have to keep fighting that, and then having your communities and building your strength and protecting from within and supporting others so that they can keep building numbers and keep that openness open.
Yeah.
A little redundant, but okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I know that was quite a question to ask, and I appreciate you taking it. Hopefully take a collective deep breath. I'll take a stab at it, too, because I recognize the heaviness of the question. And I will say that to live in yourself fully is worth the fight. There's all nuance to that, but I'll state that and leave it there short and sweet. So we have had some fantastic beginnings of conversations. I'm sure we could be here all day with the nuance and complexities. So we're pushing our time a bit, but we do have time for a question or two. So would anyone like to ask a question today? We've got the mic coming around if you do.
So you mentioned that, oh, that scared me. You mentioned that fighting book banning is one of the easiest ways to fight fascism, but how do I go about doing that?
If you feel okay to jump in, please.
Yeah, we can all jump jump in.
Yeah.
So the thing about like book bans is they have to be brought to a school board or they have to be brought to some community forum. And sometimes it's discussed publicly, sometimes it's discussed privately, but if it is in the public sector, then there's an opportunity for like town halls and stuff like that. This isn't book ban specifically, but recently the province of Manitoba added gender diversity to their human rights code, right? And so during that period, like there was a town hall, and obviously like a lot of like conservative minded people came to be like, this is why it shouldn't exist. Like a lot of people came from, I don't know if you were like a part of that. I wasn't like in there in the town hall because I was like working, but I had a lot of friends who went to like speak. And so there always will be an opportunity to speak. There's an opportunity to like learn like the actual policies that are like being put through like on the local level. And so like civics would be like municipal, provincial, like things like that, because the provincial level in Canada, at least, is like where the education is like discussed. And so, yeah, being involved in like your local community, like knowing what school division, what schools are around there, or if you have like nieces or nephews or like cousins or something that are like in school or like neighbors, then you'll get to know like what is going on with them. Like I sometimes teach like community art classes, and I found out from like some of my middle school students that like, oh, like they're allowed to check out Attack on Titan from the school library, which has a lot of like violence, death, and gore, but they're not allowed to check out Heartbreaker or Heartstopper, sorry, I forgot the name. And I was like, that is like so tame for like a queer works. Like that like does not have anything like super transgressive at all. Like it's pretty like cut and dry. And so that was like really wild. And so first of all, I asked them like, do you want to be able to like check this out? Like the most important thing is like the students' autonomy. Like, do you want me to like send a letter or like email or like talk to your parents to like be able to like send an email about it? And they were like, oh no, it's like fine this time, but I'll like let you know like in the future, like if a lot of us are really like upset by it, because they could always like check it out at the public library. It was like their school library specifically. So being like involved in that way, like I say like it's easy, but it's also hard because like a lot of us are so like isolated, but that also involves like being involved in your community and like getting to know your neighbor and like stuff like that. So when I say it's like easy, it also does require a bit of like social battery, but once you're involved and start to like learn things and you can like, you know, do like the investigation and like see what the next steps are, you can like, I think literally just like asking like, how can I, like once you find out something, like how can I like support this or like things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to respect the time, but also add to that, like echoing what you said. I think of when we talk about gender diversity and the town hall on that, and how much work like Trans Manitoba put in. So just knowing that there is likely a collective of people that does exist, and so joining in on them or forwarding, like I'm really interested in that. And then as well as it seemed like when you're talking about teaching and community, that it starts small. It could be, you know, supporting the youth that are around you, coming to Prairie Comics and like keeping an eye out for some books that you could just like share. You know, a lot of our ability to read queer trans books, when people are youth, it might be like getting a comic from a festival like here, where your school is not allowing you to. Is that okay? Absolutely not, but it's an avenue to be able to see yourself and keep supporting the youth around. So there's lots likely we could, talk about how to fight like more specifically more, but that's something I've experienced is every time I've looked for a collective, which isn't to say that these happen out of thin air. People have done so much work in, for example, Trans Manitoba to create these collectives, but that they do exist and people are coming together to use their voices. So thank you so much for your question. And I do apologize for cutting things short if you had a question to ask. One thing I will just remind folks is that there are resources available. So I think of like Kids Help Phone 686868, texting that for youth. There's also the Trans Lifeline to connect to support. Sorry, I'm going a little bit off the top of my head right now, but we'll include those as well, posting this on YouTube and include those in the information. And if you do have questions about those specific resources, you can ask me if you're in person here. Thank you so much, folks, for all of your incredible lived experience, wisdom, and knowledge. And thank you all for attending this important conversation today. And hope you have a good rest of the Prairie Comics Festival and check out all the amazing queer art. Thanks so much.